The Battlefield 6 beta is over, so unfortunately we are in purgatory until October the 10th, but that's okay, I think. I don't know, do any of you have any time travel machines? Let me know in the comments. That would be a fantastic use of your time and skills. So anyway, I want to talk about a few things that I would love to see change from the Battlefield 6 beta, as well as a couple things that a lot of people have been saying to change, but I don't think should be changed. So let's get into it. First of all, vehicles. I am not a vehicle player, so I'm not going to spend too terribly much time on this, but I am going to speak on this from an infantry player's perspective. Let's talk about aerial vehicles so we can get those out of the way. They basically were non-existent in my time in the beta. That is not because 3 of the maps that were in the beta did not have them necessarily, but on the one that they were there, you really didn't notice them. I shot down a couple of choppers with the Stinger. That was pretty much my only interaction with them. Other than that, again, they might as well not have been there. Now, I am absolutely the first person to tell you how annoying it is to be relentlessly farmed by vehicles that have extremely easy weapons to use and are highly explosive damage weapons, and just kind of, and anyone with 3 brain cells can farm a server, right? That's a problem. But also, it is a combined arms game, so they need to be there. But Ghost Gaming had a really good point in his video. He was talking about the jets and the cannons on the jets having a bit too much spread. So when he is trying to hit an infantry player, because Ghost is a very good vehicle player, when he is trying to hit one of them, there's just too much spread. So his skill doesn't even matter. He can't even hit anything on the ground with the cannons on his jet. Now, I do think it should require some quality aiming to be able to pull that off, and I don't think it's something that should be assisted with something like aim assist, right? It is a vehicle after all, but I do think skilled players should be rewarded. So the spread should be toned down, and it should be more of a high skill weapon. That's something that I want for all the vehicles in the game. I want it to be more of a high skill curve. The big problem in games like 2042 and Battlefield 5 and even Battlefield 1 was there was a very low skill curve for a lot of the vehicles, and it made for a lot of very annoying moments. If you remember the Pacific maps in BF5, how many times did Zeros spam you with their cannons, right? How many times in 2042 was the transport chopper at the top of the flight ceiling just using that 50mm cannon, right? That doesn't make for any kind of fun. No one's having fun with that. And so those aren't the types of things I want to see. I want to see more of that appreciation for skilled players. If that does mean making them more effective, giving them a bit more power and maneuverability, but still being a bit of glass cannons, like it seems like that's the philosophy they're going for, I'm all for it. And I think that's the type of change they should make. Now, as for tanks, I think the glass cannon philosophy has been working really well so far. And again, I'm not a tank player, but as an infantry player, I had a lot of interactions with tanks, as well as being a support gunner a few times and even running a tank for a couple of matches. I did get some hands-on with them, and honestly, this was one of the most aggressive I've seen tanks in a long time in a Battlefield game. In 2042, in Battlefield 5 in particular, even a bit in Battlefield 1 with the artillery truck, there was a lot of sitting in the spawn, basically being an artillery piece, not being in the action. And again, this is a combined arms game. I want them in the action, and very frequently, especially on a map like Siege of Cairo, that's what I remember the most. There was lots of tank encounters, and these tanks were flanked by 4 and 5 engineers because the engineer tool is very strong. And so these guys are flipping between firefights, and the tanks are firing shells at one another, and it's creating for some really good action on the points. And again, on Siege of Cairo, you've got these high and low gunfights across the street that just makes for a very fantastic battlefield experience and fantastic combined arms experience. And it doesn't mean that the tanks were completely invincible, because at a certain point, they did get destroyed. They weren't around the entire match. And I think that's exactly what I want from my combined arms experience. Now, how will this play out when the game is out and more players have their hands on it and people get more time with it and get used to it? That may change, and that would need tweaking from there. But at least in my experience, I had a ton of fun with tanks up in the action. The gunner seat is very strong, so even if you don't have a ton of engineers watching your back, if you're a vigilant gunner, you can be very good, and you have to be able to aim to be able to use that thing, but you will be rewarded for doing so. You'll be able to keep a lot of guys off your back. It just, again, I think they were in a pretty good spot from the perspective of an infantry player. That was a long segment. I didn't mean for it to be so long. So let's talk about class balance, because it's kind of weird right now. Now, I don't know how much they can really get into it. Open weapons, I'll talk about in a minute, but that definitely changes up things in class roles and classes, certain classes being more viable in certain scenarios than they would have been in a locked weapons scenario. And I do think that's a good thing. But I want to talk about the gadgets in particular, because, for example, the assault class has basically a bunch of explosive gadgets that are pretty dang strong. And I don't think that's necessarily what the assault class needs. I think it should be an option for them to have. But if you remember in Battlefield 4, the assault was the medic because you had these very powerful assault rifles. You were the tip of the spear. You were moving forward. You were keeping pushes alive by keeping your teammates alive, right? Just think of it that way. You're pushing the point. You keep your guys alive so that that push stays alive. And without that, it's just kind of a lone wolf class in a lot of ways because you still have the strong ARs, but you're just kind of pushing on your own. And support had a similar issue because they resupply both health and ammo. And that's pretty dang strong, especially when you're talking about self-sufficiency. And again, you'll notice a theme of just kind of self-sufficiency, going on your own. And that's not what I want for my classes. The classes need to work in tandem with one another in a rock, paper, scissors fashion. I'm not saying you need to copy and paste the class system from previous games, exactly how it was in Battlefield 4. I'm fine with moving things around and changing them, and maybe seeing the full breadth of gadgets in the main game might change my mind. It might define the roles a bit more, but I do want to see more of a reliance on your squad mates because that's what Battlefield is all about. It's as the great Harry Crosby described in his visit to Oxford during World War II. The British said, "We're neoclassicists, we work as a team. You Americans are romanticists, you're all about the individual. You need to be neoclassicists, right?" Battlefield is about being a neoclassicist. That was a big nerd drop in the middle of this video. I hope you learned something. Now let's get on to open weapons. Open weapons, I think, are ultimately a good thing. As I touched on earlier, it opens up more classes and their roles to more situations. Again, think of the medic in Battlefield 1. I don't know why I'm heavy on the medic today, but I am. They had DMRs, and so they were very viable at kind of mid-range. And that's great unless you're pushing a point in a close quarters map and then all of your squad mates are dead and you need to revive them, but it's very hard to clear that point when all you have is DMR, so then you become ultimately useless. But if you had an SMG, you could probably make that happen, right? Or, any kind of close quarters weapon. Thinking on a modern game, you could have an AR, SMG, carbine, whatever. And that's what we have here. So now you can be more effective with whichever scenario calls for whichever type of weapon. You might need a longer range weapon. You might be fine sticking with the LMGs. They were pretty good in the beta. And so, again, that's where I think the open weapons can offer a lot to the game. To me, it didn't change the readability too much. I think a lot of people maybe overhype the idea of readability. I don't know that many quadrillion IQ dudes who are just like insta reading. Oh my God, that's an assault class. I need to flank them and sneak around and take them out from behind. Once the bullets are flying at me, I'm thinking of how to shoot back without getting hit, right? That's kind of the first thought that comes to mind. I'm not thinking, oh, they have 4 bullets to kill at this range. If they shoot me, I'm shot, right? There's just not a lot of time to think. Everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the mouth. And I think a lot of people are pretending they still have a plan after they get hit in the mouth. You know what I'm saying? So those are my thoughts. I'm obviously more than happy to hear any arguments for keeping closed weapons. Let me know in the comments how you guys feel about open versus closed weapons. Obviously, closed weapons is more traditional Battlefield, but in my opinion, I, at worst, did not mind the open weapons. Let's talk about maps for certain modes. Let's not kid ourselves. Not all the maps are going to be perfect for every single mode. They're just not. Empire State is not good for Rush. And I think they need to redraw some attack and defend lines on some of the other maps because like on Siege of Cairo, someone had an LMG in a window standing over our attacking team spawn. And that does not make for a fun time. Now I know Rush is not the premier mode of Battlefield like it was back in Bad Company 2. The maps are not being built around Rush. Breakthrough has really taken that over. And personally, I do prefer Breakthrough just because it's more of what I think of when I come to Battlefield, the big combined arms push and pull. But that doesn't mean we leave Rush behind because Rush still has a place, and I think it should be taken care of. I don't see the reason in just kind of slapping something together just to say you have it when you could make it really good. And to me, that's one of the things that's holding BF6 back from being a truly elite game. It is a good game with flaws, but if they could have put a bit more time in polishing up certain things, again, like Rush, making sure certain areas are much better for Rush, I think that would have been greatly appreciated by the community, and I think that would just add to the playability of the game to where so many modes are much more viable. And honestly, I would much rather have a couple of maps for a mode that work really well as opposed to a bunch of mediocre to bad maps, right? I wouldn't mind if they deleted a couple of the bad maps and obviously reworked some of the battle lines on the maps that have potential, but we didn't really get to find out because they just were again, they're standing in our spawn. I can't move if they're standing in our spawn. So let's move on to Netcode. You will definitely have noticed if you play both beta weekends that beta weekend 2 had significantly worse Netcode. Why that is, I'm not sure. Could have been because they added more content. I don't know. They do have a history of launching with pretty terrible Netcode, so we'll just kind of have to see how that goes on launch. But I do think that needs to be something that is nailed on launch, because I don't think any of us want to spend another 6 months waiting for the game to be fixed before we actually start getting content, like in Battlefield 2042, Battlefield 5, Battlefield 4, Battlefield 3. The list kind of goes on. Battlefield 1 was honestly the last time they had a pretty smooth launch. And performance-wise, the beta ran great. So it's really just the Netcode. Speaking of performance oddities, Footstep audio was weird. I could hear the footsteps clearly. I've heard a lot of people say that it was completely silent. Maybe that is the case at times. I didn't really notice that, maybe because it was silent, so I didn't notice something that I wasn't noticing. But I did hear footsteps. The directional audio was just very, very weird. And I do have 3D headphones that I use. I've used them for a long time. The audio settings don't allow you to really select good 3D audio. I did see someone say if you put it on default, it works the best for 3D audio. I'm not sure. There were definitely times where I thought a guy was maybe coming from one direction and then he came from just the completely opposite direction. And it was the same footsteps. Like I could tell it was their footsteps. It seemed like it was coming from a very strange place. And I do think after, especially one of the few good things 2042 did was footstep audio, I do think they need to work on that again for this game, because it is in a pretty messy place. Indoor-outdoor lighting is another thing I would change. If you remember, Battlefield 1 was notorious for this. Looking outside from inside had this weird super bright light effect, and then looking outside to inside made it really dark inside. And I'm assuming it's just an aspect of the Frostbite engine sometimes that just makes it do that when they work with certain settings. I don't know why it happens. I don't work at DICE, so I'm not sure. But it does seem like something that crops up every now and again. And if they would just work on that, because there were times even if I was in a destroyed building that should be pretty lit up and I was trying to look out a window, again, with no real walls around it, just like part of a wall with a window, it would still do the weird bright lighting outside. I could not see anything. So that needs to be fixed. Now let's talk about a couple things that don't need touching whatsoever, because I've seen a lot of people complain about, oh, the colors on the map, they're so drab and toned down and muted. Yeah, it's a war game. Whomst of thunk a war zone would have drab, dull colors. I don't know if you've seen pictures of any war zone from the past 100 years that have been colorized, but there's not a lot of them that are bright, sunny, beautiful places. Especially in a piece of art that's supposed to be a piece of entertainment, that's supposed to have a tone that helps the player feel as if they are in a war zone. I don't really want it to feel like I'm going out for brunch with my grandma. Right? Like, I don't want a super bright, oh, look at this beautiful field of green. Like, Battlefield 5 had a bit of this. 2042 had a lot of this. It was just like very clean lines. We're going on Rotterdam. We're going to get a little coffee. I want to feel like I'm in a war. So far, the maps in Battlefield 6 felt like I was in a war zone. It felt like exactly how I wanted it to feel. Don't touch it. Just don't touch it. That's it. It's not hard. It reflects the tone that we all want. Think Battlefield 3. Yeah, the blue filter was weird, but everyone still talks about Battlefield 3 for its graphics, for its tone, for its everything. It's probably next to Battlefield 1, the most cinematic game in the franchise, right? Like it, let's keep that going. Let's keep that idea rolling. Also, I'm not sure what weapon skins they're planning to add to the game. I'm sure they're going to add a variety of them, and I get it. It's part of a live service. Just I really liked the way the factions looked, and some really good faction-specific skins I think would be really, really good. Just kind of like BF4, where you just had a variety of different camos, where the skin didn't really change that much. I know they're not going to do just that, because it would be insane to charge $10 for a different, like a reshade of the default skins. But just keep them grounded, and I think they will. I think they've gotten a lot of feedback about that, but that's what I want to see from the game. I don't want to see Nicki Minaj slide canceling into C Point, right? I don't want to get killed by an American Dad character. I want to stay immersed in this world, this incredible looking game that they've done a really good job on so far. I want to keep it that way so that everybody's having fun. Now, I'm not a purist snob. I get it. Some are going to be more out there than others, but I just don't want a ton of crazy, weird ghost effect stuff and whatnot. I want to feel like I'm still on a battlefield, like I'm surrounded by a bunch of grunts, not a bunch of dorks. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. Also, for the love of God, add a server browser. EA, you make billions of dollars. You can pay for persistent servers. Jesus Christ.